I do think particularly women, and society's so uncomfortable with women's anger.
Yeah.
Really doesn't have space for it.
Hi there, and welcome to Am I Crazy Or? The podcast where I, Lisa Påske, businesswoman, entrepreneur, and general troublemaker, take on all the ways that society gaslight us into thinking we are going crazy. This season, we are tackling the perimenopause. They often call it the second spring. I think it should be called monsoon season. But I'm not doing any of this alone. In each episode, I'll be interviewing and talking to experts, specialists, and women going through it, giving you all the information that you need to make more sense of this chaotic period of your life. Today, I'll be chatting to Kim Curran. Kim is an author, an award-winning creative director, and also my best friend. It was actually Kim that got me thinking, maybe I am in perimenopause. So this is a chat between two friends who are both going through perimenopause and all the crazy that we felt. Thank you so much for being my guest on this insane podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
So we've known each other for quite a long time.
20 years, I think.
I think it's 23 years.
Wow, okay.
It's bonkers. So
We met when we were 2.
Yeah. Early menopause.
Yeah.
So I want to tell people a little bit about how we met. Do you remember the day we met?
I do very well.
What
We met at a kickboxing class, and I was like, she seems cool. And I initially thought you were Scottish, so I was like obviously drawn to you, thinking, oh, another Celt. And you're like, oh no, I'm Norwegian. So I told you a joke in Norwegian.
I was so impressed by that.
And then that was it.
It was the worst joke I've ever heard, but no one could ever speak Norwegian from Norwegians, even barely Norwegians.
And then that was it. Friends for life.
Yeah. And also, I think it's so funny because we only just realized this a few years back, I think, that I have you in my phone as Kim Kickass.
Yep.
And
you are Lisa Kickass in my phone.
How fun is that? We are pretty
And
kick-ass.
still, however many phones we've had over the last 20 years, you're still Lisa Kickass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have you as a guest on this because my own perimenopause discovery journey started with you.
Yeah. I'm like your perimenopause sherpa.
Yes.
Guiding you up the mountain.
I do feel like that is something that's really how you find out about.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happening. You know, it's women are passing it on to each other. You know, like mine was, I first kind of was put on the same journey as you by my oldest friend from school. So I think everybody is just like, I'm 2 years older than you, I think. You know, we're all just like passing this knowledge down for something that I think there's a lot of talk about menopause, but not an awful lot of knowledge about perimenopause, which is what you're doing here. So it's amazing.
Exactly. And that's the thing I find the most terrifying is that I had no idea that perimenopause was a thing.
Yeah.
I really honestly thought menopause was when you got in your maybe mid-50s and your period stopped and you got hot flashes.
That's
and
all anyone
sweats.
talks about is hot flashes and standing in front of a fridge. It's like, no, there's like so many other things going on. Yeah,
exactly. And so tell me a bit about your journey of how it started for you.
How I kind of clocked on. Essentially for me, it was really a lot of the first symptom really for me was fatigue, this kind of overwhelming fatigue. And at the start, I just put it down to long COVID because it was just, we'd all had COVID, we were coming out of it. My life had changed, I'd quit my job. So there was an awful lot of change going on in my life anyway. So I really didn't think that it was anything hormonal, or I explained it to so many other different ways. But the first symptom for me was real, just this massive fatigue. And then I was having dinner with my oldest friend, Kathy, and she was like, girl, menopause, you're the same age as me, get yourself, this is what it's about. And it didn't occur to me.
Yeah.
So the next thing I did was talk to my sister. So she's 5 years older than me. And I sort of asked her about her experience. And there was a lot of what she was saying I related to. Did a little bit of the old internet research and saw that there are maybe 30 symptoms. And I ticked probably 15 of them. I had no change in my cycle. So I immediately didn't think it could be anything to perimenopause because I was still to the day, 28 days cycle have always been. So nothing was changing there. But all these other symptoms, tiredness, mood changes, weight gain, a sort of loss of interest and love of life, all of which I was putting down to just this wild period that we were going through with COVID. And sort of lockdown.
I remember going on a dog walk with you, and you saying that you thought you had long COVID.
Yeah.
And for a very long time, that was what you thought it was.
That's what I was, and I think a lot of people were like brain fog.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's
my God, the brain fog.
this sort of like not being, because I've never kept a diary in my life. I always had a really sharp memory, and I was like double booking myself and forgetting things. And I was so grateful, and I went to my nurse at my GP. So somebody said, don't bother with a doctor. Sorry, doctors. But I went to the nurse, and she happened to be a specialist in menopause. And she said to me, I had my phone, I had a list of my 15 symptoms. And she said, welcome to perimenopause. Now let's get you back to you. And I almost burst into tears. It was I felt like I was seen, and then whack on some HRT patches, and immediately within a week, just felt like myself again. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, it's crazy. I want to go back a bit to, because obviously I've known you for such a long time, and I think this is the really interesting bit about perimenopause that we don't really realize. It's just the amount of symptoms that comes with it, especially for how you feel. I think it's easier to see in others than on
definitely.
yourself.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Like, did you feel differently? Like, was there a point where you just felt like you felt different in yourself?
Yeah, I guess. And again, all of these things are very easy when you look back on and you think, was that? Or was that the stress I was going through? Because I think there's something about just at the time of our lives where we're probably reaching the highest point of our careers is also the time that this is all of these changes happening in our hormones. So is it the stress? Is it the responsibility that we're under? Or is it actually perimenopause creeping away? And I think there was a marriage, both those things. I look back at points where I was running a pitch and I just couldn't cope. And I'd never had that experience before. And I look back now and think, oh, was that actually, hormones, meaning I was doubting myself. I was questioning everything. I was taking everything, I've been really sensitive to criticism, and I'm really good at taking criticism.
I'm getting goosebumps because that is one of the things, having known you and being best friends for so long, I know I get like goosebumps on my face right now because I could really like feel it because I think the one of the things that describes you the most from all this time knowing you is like you are the one person that I know that can handle a ridiculous amount of like, feedback and having you've been a copywriter for many years and then having people like comment on things. And I've always been like, oh, time to fuck off. And you've always been like, well, I understand what they mean. And I see their points and stuff. And so you've had such an incredible amount of patience and like room and seeing you doubt yourself at that point. I remember the first few times, I think, in conversations, especially as you were working at that creative agency where you were starting to doubt yourself. And I was like, what the fuck?
And then it's really hard, at the time you think, oh, well, that's the environment, that's being a woman in business, women in advertising surrounded by not necessarily the most supporting environment. But I do look back now and I think there was some element of a hormonal element creeping in. Yeah. And had I been aware of that, I might have been able to address it, or I might have been able to get extra support. So I think that was sort of, looking back, was one of the things. And then, COVID happened, lockdown happened. My team was shrunk in size. Suddenly my workload tripled. I was doing 13, 14 hour days on Zoom and I just burnt out.
Yeah.
And then when I came back from 2 weeks off, I quit. Second day back, I quit. And it was this enormous sense of weight being lifted.
Yeah.
But I think maybe I would have been able to cope more, would have been able to keep going for longer. That stress I might have found ways to deal with it. Yeah. So it's really hard to know. Was it the stress? Was it perimenopause? I think it's a combination of lots of things. But it's interesting, I think, if we were able to remove this element or support ourselves with that element, it would make all of the other things that you're going through in life.
Yeah.
easier.
I've actually recently been obviously doing loads of research and there there is a lot of research kind of coming out now about women actually quitting their job or considering quitting their
Absolutely.
job as soon as they get to perimenopause.
Yeah. I mean, they call COVID the great what's it? I'll try and remember the word is the Great Resignation. So they call COVID the Great Resignation. There was this huge wave of everybody quitting their jobs.
Yeah.
But you look at it and you think they're nearly all women in their 40s. And is this something that's just this sort of time bomb that businesses are missing out these opportunities to support women, just at the top of their game, going and starting their own business, because it means, which is phenomenal for women, good on them. They can go and create a life that works for them and fits into all of their other challenges and all of their other responsibilities. But what's it mean for us as a society if we're not having women at those sort of at the table in the big places? So really interesting. Yeah.
And I also saw some stats that were actually quite terrifying. Women that are menopausal, perimenopause, menopause, etc., is going to be the largest growing demographic.
Oh my goodness.
2030 is going to be 1 billion women in menopause or that are in the menopause period.
Watch out, world.
Yeah, it's going to be breathing fire.
That's fascinating.
So it's obviously a growing population as well. But that's why it's so important now, I think, to really get information out there. But so I have something else I wanted to go back to on the when you were working, because I remembered the other day something really funny, because we used to do walks all the time. We used to go for walks in the park and whatever. And I remember it must have been maybe just before COVID. So I would have been 40, you 42, around that age. Probably for me, I think that was the start for me. Okay. I think I started a bit early.
Before COVID, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I remember we were joking about how it comes to a stage in your life where you just run out of fucks to give. Do you remember this?
Yes.
And we literally pretended we had a watch, and we would look at it and go sorry, all out of fucks to give. And now I think it's just quite interesting, because maybe this is what happens, because the hormone estrogen
it's the people pleasing
hormone. The people pleasing. It's what makes women the caretakers. And so as the estrogen depletes,
we give less fucks.
We run out of fucks to give.
Absolutely.
So
which is really shocking for the people in our lives,
yeah,
who we have had the capacity to care for and, you know, look after and take on a lot of their stuff on, that suddenly we're like, yeah, I'm done with this now. To be like, who are you? You know, like, and I think, yeah, it's really interesting how women are now, and I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think if we can embrace it and understand it, that not giving so much of a fuck.
Yeah.
Or reserving the fucks that you have to give
yes,
for the things that matter, as opposed to just caring about everything and taking everything on. I think it's
yeah,
it could become a superpower.
Yeah, exactly.
There's 1 billion women, we can take on the world.
Yeah. I think we had like a version of it, which was we would allocate fucks to give. So 2 to family.
Yeah.
1 to partner. And then like, sorry, you have to come back tomorrow. Yeah. All your fucks is given.
I'm all out today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. But
do you find that yourself as well? Have you really noticed that your sort of tolerance for everything has gone down?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things is because I've always been quite hot-headed.
Yeah.
And kind of bad-tempered. Like in college, my nickname when we graduated was the last Amazon. So I have always been kind of hot-headed. What I noticed more was more the emotional, the kind of like feeling really upset or down. Like my biggest challenge in hormone related has always been the week before my period. I always feel really depressed. I used to call it period depression. And perimenopause has definitely kind of exaggerated that. And that was kind of what what I really struggle with. Like in 2022 is when it got really bad for me, like losing my mind. I felt like I was going crazy.
So many different options.
Oh my God.
Before you even thought about perimenopause.
Oh, of course. Like, honestly, I at one point I thought I had Alzheimer's. I was convinced I have Alzheimer's because I couldn't remember anything. But the kind of like depression of it all, like feeling really down and really sad, especially before I was due my period, and that I felt like got worse and worse as I went. Now I realized I was coming into perimenopause. While what I find really interesting is both my best friend, you, and my best friend in Norway, Lena, she has only just now started HRT, and she has always been this most calm, collected, just like everyone loves her because she's so lovely. She turned into a dragon.
And you're like, yes!
I was like, I've been waiting for this. But that really scared her because she was like, what is this anger?
Oh, yes.
Like, where's this come from?
So much rage.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been angry. I've always had this sort of bubbling anger. And I didn't know where it came from. And I talked to my mother about it recently, and she was like, I've always been angry my whole life.
Oh,
so
really?
I think that's become worse. And it's interesting. I think the book that I've written is the Morrigan.
Let me let's go back up. So after you quit your job,
yes,
you started doing more freelance work.
Yeah.
So and then you've always been you've been writing books for how long?
2012, my first book was published. So 2010, I think I first started writing. Yeah.
Yeah, so a long time, and the books that you've written up until now has been YA,
young adult, yeah,
yeah, and then after you quit your job, when did you start writing this book? And then
2020.
2020.
Yeah, so I can kind of look back at the date when the file was first created, and it was, again, it's kind of interesting, I think, for me, in that a lot of the perimenopause stuff happened at the same time as COVID, or lockdown rather than COVID, because it was this great pause. It gave us this time of reflection. It gave us this moment to reevaluate our lives. And I just really stopped and thought, what is it I actually want to say? Like, what are the things that are important to me? And the YA books I've been writing before were very fun, very frothy, great fun to write. But I felt like I had been hiding from myself. And I wanted to really, really test myself and really challenge. So this book that I probably had been at the back of my head for a long time, I had not thought I was good enough to write. And, actually my therapist, I went to a therapist to say, I'm a good writer. There's that scene in Pretty Woman where he says, I'm angry with my father.
Oh, yeah.
Mine was, I'm a good writer. I had to have therapy having been a writer my entire career, having written 6 books at this point. Still didn't quite believe in myself. So went on this journey, and so it was it's an Irish, a feminist retelling of Irish mythology from the point of view of the goddess of fury. So it became this channel for all of this anger and all of this rage, and it became incredibly cathartic and really healing. And all these sort of moments that I had in my life just poured into this book. Yeah. It was a really interesting experience.
Tell me, so it's called the Morrigan.
The Morrigan, yeah.
And that is an Irish goddess
of fury.
Tell me about the Morrigan. Who is she?
So she's the Irish goddess of fury, battle, sovereignty. She's one of the people that are called the Tuatha Danann. So it's a tribe of, the tribe of Doana. So they probably wouldn't even, as if I'm talking about them as if they're real, but it's only us that we look back now can think of them as gods. So they were really a tribe of people who had magic, had powers, and they were the early settlers of Ireland. But they're the early myths that we have in Irish mythology. So with Greek mythology, you kind of have, Zeus and that lot and the Titans before him. But with Irish mythology, you have the Tuatha Danann. So she was, so you see her in all of the early myths. So it's really interesting. The very, very early stories, you see her there. She's associated with crows. There's a phrase we would call her spear hopping. So she dances across the battlefield, hopping onto spears. And she's just this kind of force of anger and rage and battle and death. But then you see her again and again through all of the latest stories. So in Irish mythology, there are 4 main cycles. There's the mythological cycle, the Fenian cycle, the Ulster cycle, and the cycle of kings. And she goes all the way through these stories. So she just appears, she's kind of woven into all of them. So while the other gods you don't hear of again, you hear of her all the way through. So yeah, it was just a fascinating journey to go on.
So because it's quite a beautiful coincidence or synchronicity maybe that you wrote the Morrigan while in perimenopause.
Definitely, because I almost think she becomes a kind of icon for it.
I think so.
She's actually, her sort of final form is as the Banshee, which is this wailing hag. So the kind of origin of her name, Banshee. So you see her as this wailing hag who screeches at the death. So you think she's gone from this sort of vibrant, spear-hopping woman to a screeching hag. And I kind of go on that journey in the book. So I think, yeah, it was kind of interesting that a lot of, even that, I was writing when I wasn't even aware of what I was going through. But a lot of that, I think, has come out. And looking back on it now, I'm able to see that. And I'm able to sort of bring those things to the fore a little bit with, as I was doing my edits. I was like, that's actually what I was talking about there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting.
So it's almost like it channeled the fury and the anger.
Absolutely. And healed. There was a catharsis as well, which I hadn't expected.
Yeah. I used to, that's the thing, is like with anger, is that people are so scared of women that are angry.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I feel kind of sad about when you talk to people about women that are in the menopause. That's one of the first things they will mention. They were like, oh yeah, my mom was really grumpy when she was menopause, or and that's the really sad thing, is that when you're feeling that anger, that is kind of like pain that's coming out.
Yeah.
I used to say this to my ex-husband, like he would get really frustrated that I would get angry so quickly. And I was like, I don't know why you're so upset about it. Because when you see my anger, it is it leaving my body.
Yeah.
That is really what it's all about.
Rather than, isn't there, there was a study that shows that if you hold on to your anger and you hold on to your emotions, you're more likely to get cancer.
Yeah.
You need to double check that, please.
Yeah. I have
but
heard.
Yeah, and I do think particularly women, and society's so uncomfortable with women's anger.
Yeah.
Really doesn't have space for it. I mean, the amount of times, don't screech, keep your voice down, this sort of, it's interesting, sorry to talk about the word again, but she has this screech.
Yeah.
She has this piercing screech. I thought that was really interesting because when we get angry, our voice gets high.
Yeah.
And that's, people turn away from it and they're sort of disgusted by it, but there really isn't space for women's anger.
Yeah.
I think it's becoming an increasingly popular theme in books, in films and everything. So that's lovely to see. We're making space for it now.
In fact, wasn't there was a book that I remember you recommended. I think you recommended it to me. The book, The Power.
Oh, The Power, yeah.
Which is about teenage girls.
It starts with teenage girls, but it spreads through every woman in the world. So it's by Naomi Alderman. It's amazing. And so, yes, it's that women develop this power to electrocute people through their hands.
Yeah.
And really what it's doing is exploring what happens when women are able to physically overpower men.
Yeah.
What happens then to the dynamics of women's power.
Yeah.
But the thing that my favorite scene in the book is there's a women's march and women are passing the power from one to the other. And I remember when we were talking about the perimenopause, how you went and told Lena, I've told other friends. It feels like that passing on of this information to each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of, so.
That's beautiful. So the anger is a really interesting thing. And especially coming into perimenopause. And now, I now realized I've been in perimenopause for like 4 years at least. And there's so many of the symptoms that I've had. I've actually looked through my NHS app, because now you can actually go into your app, look through all the things that you've been to the doctor for. And honestly, it seems so obvious to me now.
Shoulder pain being one of the key ones.
I had a bloody operation.
An operation.
I had an operation, and one of the main symptoms is like frozen shoulder.
Frozen shoulder, yeah.
Oh God. And I had a UTI for an entire year. I was on antibiotics for 8 months. I went to several specialists. No one mentioned UTIs being a menopause symptom. And I was 45. That is very normal age to be in perimenopause.
Yeah.
And I just find it shocking how little actual doctors or GPs particularly know, and how unlikely they are to listen to you. And so I remember going back for a smear test like a few months ago, and it was the same gynecologist that I had seen, and I was really worried about these UTIs and whatever. And I swear to God, he was insinuating that I was sleeping around and that's why I got UTIs. And then so I told him, I was like, well, you know what? I have not had a single UTI since I started HRT.
Amazing.
And he was like, oh, that's funny. I'm like, not really.
No.
It's not bloody funny.
And the lack of education and awareness around it.
Yeah.
Is staggering. Given, as you're saying, like every woman, if they're, have the privilege of aging, will go through it.
Yeah.
Like so little information. I mean, it's a bit like, it reminds me sometimes of things like ADHD, how people are recognizing it thanks to TikTok.
Yeah.
Or, they're going, oh my God, that's me. They're seeing it through social media, or they're hearing it from other things. It's not something that they're being diagnosed through official channels generally.
Yeah.
So it's amazing.
And that's again why it's so important to like keep on talking about it and talking about all the symptoms, because I think one of the biggest misconception is like, I wish people would stop talking about
hot flushes. Never
like,
had one. Don't know what they are.
Honestly, I haven't met a single woman, even in their 50s and 60s, that was a big problem.
Yeah.
But it does obviously happen. But there are different symptoms that happen for different people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm now like the equivalent of a Mormon knocking on people's doors, like, have you heard of our savior HRT? Anybody who has anything, a cough. Could it be perimenopause?
Exactly.
Like, I'm now like obsessed. But there are so many symptoms. Foot pain. That's my sister had really bad pain in her feet. And that was helped with HRT.
That's so funny. But what would you say? So how long have you been on HRT now?
Coming up for a year. So it was November last year. Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that aren't talked about enough, like there's more and more people talking about menopause, and you hear mostly on social media. But one of the biggest challenges for me, like I've been on HRT for about 6 months, is once you get on it, it's not the end. That there's a lot of testing.
Yeah, and also trying different things. So for me, like the days after it, I felt amazing.
Yeah.
I felt like, oh my God, back to myself. Like, hello, no fatigue. Like, again, the biggest thing for me, fatigue. The fatigue lifted, like this whole cloud had lifted. Felt amazing. But then actually just a couple of months ago, the chemist gave me a different brand of my patch, and all of the symptoms came back. And I felt even worse than I had done. I felt awful. And it took me a while to realize, I think this patch isn't working. But luckily I was able to sort of say, please put me back on the other one. And then immediately within a week of being back on it, everything's fine.
Yeah.
But, you have to experiment and get different levels. Like I know you've had issues with progesterone. It's been really tough for you, isn't it?
Like, honestly, again, like now looking back at my medical notes, this should have been really obvious. So now I realize that PMS is basically sensitive to progesterone. So your mood being really changed from the week before your period. So the PMS symptoms is due to progesterone.
That's mad, isn't it?
And also when I was 29, I think, I went on the mini pill, which is...
I hated it. Yep.
Yeah, mini pill, which is progesterone, and so it's basically both hormones. And I was admitted to hospital with goodness. 80% of my body in a rash.
Yeah.
And so they were like, oh, you're allergic to these tablets. But they made it sound like it was the brand of tablets. And so I never went on the pill after that because it was really bad. And I already knew that I was like, I was very sensitive to hormones. And then in my early 40s, so literally the year I turned 40, do you remember this? I had eczema everywhere. Yeah. That's where the perimenopause started. So the eczema is actually linked to progesterone. So it's the reason I got my whole body in this. My body is so sensitive to progesterone that it basically gives you an immune response, an autoimmune response. And that's where the rash comes from.
Oh my goodness.
And so right now you can see I have some eczema.
Wow.
Because this is the week before my period and I'm on progesterone HRT. And so I get the progesterone rash. So very few people understand really how the body reacts to the different hormones.
Yeah.
But that I could have known more about this if they were really educating me at that stage, saying your body might be sensitive to progesterone.
Yeah.
And which is also why I found it so hard as I went into perimenopause, because it impacted my brain so much. And that the kind of like really like low, like I was basically sadness from inside out.
Yeah.
I was like, "Ooh," constantly just feeling like really depressed, which isn't like me.
Yeah.
But yeah, progesterone for me has been a quite a challenge. So when I started, and this is like, my doctor is amazing, and I'm going to do an episode with her as well.
Oh, brilliant.
And when I first saw her, she knew that this might be the case for me. So I started on estrogen first.
Because I was like, why aren't you taking progesterone? My nurses told me you have to be taking progesterone.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're told. So
Yeah.
You
You have to take progesterone, because if not, your womb won't shed, and it could be danger of cervical cancer, I think. So she kind of knew that, so she let me be on estrogen only for 3 months, and then oh my god, I felt so much better.
Oh wow.
God, do you remember? Like, because I had the same thing as you. I was like, oh my god,
I can take on the world.
Let's do this. Woo! And then I started the progesterone, and oh my god. And so I had, well, most people get utrogeston. Is that what you're on?
Yes.
Utrogeston, and by mouth. And again,
Yeah.
completely, like, it was the worst depression immediately. And so I then immediately thought, I will have to stop HRT. And I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to stop this. And because you can't be on estrogen only if you still have the womb. And so I went back to her, and then she recommended I take it vaginally instead of by mouth, because then it doesn't go through your body.
Yeah.
Again, with all the it seems like
Just
I have
localized.
yeah. And
Really? Brilliant.
absolutely amazing. Like, no problems at all now.
Amazing.
So there's such a long period to also learn about yourself, and everyone's different.
Yeah.
And so not feeling disheartened or not stopping HRT before
you're trying different things out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So earlier you were saying that you felt like you're back to your old self. What does that mean?
I think for me, I mean, I keep going back to the fatigue, this just tiredness, this inability to, I would have 2-hour naps in the day just to make it through the day. So it was that lifted. And with that came back energy, the brain fog lifted, my focus, I think my creativity, I was able to write longer and get more pleasure out of it. But really it was just energy. I just felt like alive again. So that's really what it meant for me. And I thought it was so interesting that those are the words the nurse said, let's get you back to you. And when I went back to her a month after, I was like, hello. I wanted to hug her, because it was just this real sense of, just feeling youthful again. And life felt happier and brighter, and all that kind of, it was great.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I felt the same. I honestly really thought I was losing my mind.
Yeah.
Hence the name of this podcast is Am I Crazy? Am I crazy? It's more like, am I crazy? Because I might be.
I'm feeling crazy.
I actually was saying to someone today that there's a lot of characters that are now, or characters from movies and stuff, that are now really making me think of menopause. Like Harlequin, lost her shit. She was all very happy, and then she was like, fuck. Or Or I watched Dory the other day.
Oh, yeah.
The Pixar movie.
I haven't seen that yet.
Dory seems like she has menopause and ADHD.
She can't remember anything. So
No. Just keep swimming. That's it. Oh my God, you have to watch that movie. That's so good. Daenerys.
Yes.
Khaleesi.
Yeah.
Who was the most amazing leader and like so powerful and able and intelligent, and then lost her shit, burnt it all down.
That's what we want to do. But I think it also kind of goes back to what we're talking about, discomfort with female rage. You know, the way they treated her and the way that they treat any woman in power is just to feel really uncomfortable about it and not, there's a trope you see all the time in comic books and films of women with immense power, they lose their minds. As if women's poor, fragile brains aren't capable of holding power. And I think actually one of the triggers that set me off of journeying to write about the Morrigan was Hillary Clinton's defeat by Trump. And it was this aggregate rage of every woman who has been passed over by useless men.
Yeah.
And you just look at this incredibly capable woman and the world just didn't, they would rather somebody possibly incapable than allow her to have power. It's really interesting to see how uncomfortable we are with women's power. But I think that was the case of Daenerys. Yes, she was also done with this shit.
Yeah.
But the way they then coped with her burning it all to the ground was to kill her, essentially. Sorry, spoilers. It has been quite a long time since Game of Thrones is out. And we all hate the last season. Sorry.
Yeah. In the time that you now know that you've probably been in perimenopause for a few years, or how long do you think you've...
I'd say 4 years.
4 years.
Maybe even more, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably, like hormones, there would be wanes, so there'd be probably times when there was just a little bit of going on, and then sometimes... But yeah, so I think over the last 4 years, I would say.
And do you think anyone else have noticed?
I think what was possibly delayed anybody noting or myself noting again was this lockdown period, because there was so much change. So quitting my job, essentially what I did is I created an incredibly peaceful life where I hardly left the house. I sit in my pajamas and I write. So I didn't have any of the external stresses going on. And by removing them, it probably disguised a lot of what would have been things that I couldn't cope with or stresses. I went out once a week, and even that would have been exhausting. Yeah. But I was putting it all down to this period that we were all going through. So it took me probably a long time to realize that was going on. But I changed my life drastically, possibly because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not all for the bad.
No.
I think all of the decisions I've made, I have been better. I'm now in a more interesting life, a more sort of creative life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting that there are a lot of women that are considering leaving their job or quitting, etc. But it's also a lot of women that are deciding to go freelance or start their own company, etc. To be able to do things in the way that they need to do it now.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting for you as well was, the real connection between menopause and ADHD.
Oh my God.
So the huge spike of people being diagnosed or women being diagnosed in their 40s and this idea that it's a trend. And
yeah, for me, one of the biggest aha moments and kind of what escalated the getting to the I am definitely in perimenopause was that my brain felt like it was so chaotic. I couldn't remember anything, like literally nothing. And I did so many weird mistakes. Like I ran a relatively large agency that I sold to a really big advertising network. And so I've been quite capable in business. And I've just been running a consultancy with just myself. And one of the things I did last year was I paid all of the HMRC PAYE from my own account. This is bonkers. Obviously, it was all paid, so it's all fine. But it's like crazy things. And once I and one of the things that I really struggled with was even the simplest task. Like after I left Verve, which was my agency that I ran for 15 years, I had the same kind of situation like you, where COVID had happened and everything had slowed down, and I really thought I was just exhausted from running an agency, selling it, and all of that.
And you were.
I
mean,
was.
You know, that
I was like,
a lot.
it was mental.
Yeah.
But then, especially like I think for me the big kind of change was in 2022, where I found everything really difficult. Like driving my daughter to school was so stressful. I would drive her to school, always be late, then get really stressed out about it, park by the church, the car park in the church next to her school, and cry for 20 minutes every day. Like I would just be crying.
There are so many
crying.
mothers I hear of them the same age who just, their car is their crying place.
Yeah.
You know,
just
we're
like,
just like,
have to
I'll go and cry in my car and then I'll go to work. Or
Yeah.
I'll, pull
It was
myself
so
together.
much crying.
Oh.
But then I realized like what was so hard for me. And I remember another period of my life where I did find everything really hard, like really easy task, like washing up and whatever. Just after I had my first daughter, I really struggled with the tiniest little task. I would just have meltdowns. And that was one of the reasons that I was like, okay, maybe I should check out whether this is menopause. But at the same time, I also had a niggling that maybe I had ADHD. And I got assessed, I think it was just a month, I think it might have been a month before I started HRT.
Yeah.
And it was such a aha moment for me when I realized, it was like seeing everything that's ever happened and situations, but from a different perspective.
Crazy, yeah.
And then when I saw my menopause doctor, it was a private clinic, and she told me that a lot of women get their ADHD get a lot worse when they go into perimenopause.
Yeah.
And now, having done the research, it turns out that the majority of women that get diagnosed with ADHD only get diagnosed when they get to perimenopause.
Yeah.
Because estrogen is so important for your brain.
Wow.
And the dopamine, like ADHD is
Yeah.
basically having no dopamine at
Yeah.
all. When the estrogen goes, no wonder I was sadness from inside out,
Yeah.
or Eeyore.
Yeah.
I was like constantly upset. And so those two things coming together has made such a big difference.
And just a kind of deep understanding of yourself. Like I remember you telling me I might have ADHD, and it showed how little I understood it at the time. I was like, no, but your house is so organized.
Oh, yeah.
I remember thinking it was this, like, that was my image of it. It was that, it was chaos. And, you know, you have this beautiful organized house and you're like, do you know how much effort it takes me? And I have to have it organized in order to be able to be sane.
Yeah.
And now I look back at, you know, our 20 plus years of friendship and like, oh man, she was ADHD from the dot, you know, like you know, all the different things that you've done, the way you throw yourself into things, you know, with so much passion, and then like, oh, done that now. Yeah. Onto something else. Yeah, it was so clearly bubbling under. And then with menopause, it just like exploded.
Yeah. Also, the fact that that started after leaving my company, splitting up with my boyfriend at the time, and then starting fucking comedy.
Stand-up comedy. But that have made perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
That made more sense to me than you running a massive corporation and then selling it for millions. Like, this is Lisa. She's a hilarious person. So I think it made sense to me. And obviously splitting up with the boyfriend was a very good idea. You don't need to keep that in the podcast.
But I think that maybe that's kind of what happens. Maybe the change, and that's what they used to call it.
It's a great term, isn't it? The change. Yeah.
The change. It is, you know, I think there's a lot of kind of like taboo about it, or a lot of things that we think about menopause that, like at the start, I was like, oh my God, does this make me less woman? Like I'm not fertile. I'm not like, does it make me less? I think I even wrote a joke about it. I think I wrote a joke about how my body knows this is its last chance, and it goes, this is the captain speaking. And I think that might be a lot. That might be it for a lot of women that we worry about it. But also the change is also such a great time to reinvent yourself.
I think it's liberating. And I think you're absolutely right. Society and our culture that has said women's worth is their youth and their fertility doesn't really know what to do with old women. Doesn't know what to do with you, your hag, essentially. Get in a pit and whatever. But it is an amazing time to reinvent yourself, and I'm so looking forward to the day of menopause. I'm really looking forward to when my periods stop. I would quite happily take my womb out with a spoon if I could. I don't need it. It doesn't do anything for me at all. So I'm looking forward to that day, and I think that's becoming more and more women are celebrating the change and this new phase of their life, rather than being something that they're afraid of or they think they're somehow worthless. We've got a way to go, but I can see.
Because what I'm quite enjoying is, and this might be a combination of now being on HRT and also getting medication for ADHD, but I am really enjoying giving less of a fuck. and not being so like anxious about pleasing everyone. Yeah. Like actually I feel like my circle or my life has kind of gotten smaller, but I'm enjoying it more because I'm not like so bothered about what someone is thinking that I don't care. Like it's like it's not in my. Well, that sounds a bit rude. Well,
no, it's fine.
It's true.
But I think there's so much more, and I think it was like, for me, it was a lot of it. Was it lockdown or was it perimenopause? Where if I wanted to go and see somebody, I was like, do I like this person enough to risk dying? Which is what I thought COVID was at the start. So it made my friendship circle very small and very precious because these were people I was literally willing to die for. Because you think, I'll go and see them, and if I die of COVID, then that's fine. But coming out of that now, I haven't even bothered to expand that again because they're the people that matter. And I now think, do I need to go to that event? Do I need to, put myself out? Do I need to worry about all those people? And much less of a give a fuck.
But see, this is the funny thing for me. It's because I think people always thought that I didn't really care, and she would say whatever anyway, like completely unfiltered.
Just didn't know you. Yeah.
But I cared a lot, and I like overthought everything. But now I actually don't give a fuck. And now I'm just like, fuck it. Although saying that, I did have a complete massive fit a couple of hours ago because I couldn't get anything working. But that is just like...
that's frustration as opposed to worrying about anyone else thinking.
Yeah. To kind of finish off, is there anything that you would say to someone that think they might be perimenopausal?
Yeah, I mean, go and speak to your doctor, go speak to your nurse. And then if you don't get the answer, try a different nurse, try a different doctor. Like it's not necessary. I was very lucky that my nurse was immediately recognizing it. But keep going until you get the answers. And do the research. Just look up. There's so much you can find out about there, and start to see if any of this is connecting with you, is resonating with you, and if it is, go get the help that you need. It's there.
Yeah.
You might need to fight to get it, but it's there.
Yeah. And also, like, I think people really need to not be so afraid of trying HRT.
Yep.
I think I will cover a whole thing about this at some point, but I think one of the biggest kind of almost disasters is how HRT is made out to be this dangerous, potentially fatal thing to do, and it can help you so much.
Absolutely.
Why would you want to suffer?
I mean, and I think there's also this attitude of like, women in the past just went through it. Yeah, well, we don't know. They went through a lot of other things. You know?
My God. I think about this now. Like, I think my mum was quite early in menopause. And I remember her actually saying, weirdly, recently, I just remembered her saying quite early on, like she was like 38 or 39 and saying she thought she was in menopause. Wow. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But I remembered it. And she was all over the place. Well, she was also had a lot of other problems. But it's interesting to look back now of all the people that, because you don't really think about it before you're in it. And like I have a lot of younger friends. Yeah. And when I say I'm doing this podcast about perimenopause, they're like, oh, cool.
Yeah, just wait.
Be quiet. And then I would just go like, You wait. You know nothing, Jon Snow. Winter is coming. Hello again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy that. I would really love to hear any feedback you might have or comments, or maybe you have a suggestion to a topic we should cover. You can get my email on the website or send me a message on Instagram. Please do follow the podcast and maybe even leave us a 5-star review. It really helps to get the message out. See you next week. Questions echo in my mind, searching answers can't seem to find. Is it me or